Hello world and all who inhabit it, my name is Minish, and today I'm going to be trying something that I don't usually do. Normally I only do speed paints and video game playthroughs, but something's been on my mind recently and I need to see if anybody else remembers it too. So growing up, we can all agree you were most likely one of three kids: a Nickelodeon kid, a Cartoon Network kid, or a Disney kid. In my case, I was both a Nickelodeon and a Disney kid, but more specifically, I was a Toon Disney kid, or Disney XD as it's called nowadays. You might remember watching cartoons like DuckTales, Gargoyles, The Proud Family, Kim Possible, and so on. Heck, I even remember cartoons like Tailspin, Lloyd in Space, and the original Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, not that crazy 3D stuff that they're doing nowadays. I think that's like the entire direction that the movie goes in, but whatever. But there's one cartoon I remember from the early 2000s that has always been a staple of my childhood and a show that almost no one seems to remember. This was definitely overshadowed by others. You may remember the popular cartoons, but do y'all remember Toad Patrol?
Listen to the thunder trees, Panther Cap. Listen to them well. They will guide you to the fairy ring, and through it, you will find Toad Hollow.
Toad Patrol was a Canadian cartoon created by George and Peggy Sarson. It premiered on Teletoon back in 1999 for Canadian viewers, and eventually made its way over to the States in 2002, where it premiered on Toon Disney. It also found its way across the pond and received dubs in Spanish, French, and Italian. The story follows 8 Toadlet siblings as they try to survive in the Great Forest and learn how the world works. You've got Furfoot, the titular leader of the group, Beauty Stem, the second in command and the healer, Elfcup, a musician and a free-spirited, fun-loving girl, Shaggy Mane, the one in the group who's known for having disastrous luck. He's also called the Giver of Names, as he ends up naming a lot of the creatures and objects that they come across in the forest. Puffball's the strong one? I mean, he doesn't really have that many character traits, aside from being strong. He's also the comic relief in quite a few of the episodes. Oyster and Slippery Jack are twins, but don't tell them that because they hate it with a passion. Oyster ends up making a telescope that she calls her See-All in a later episode, and Slippery Jack is good with making pathfinds, or maps. And the last of the group of the siblings is Panther Cap, the youngest of the group. He can talk to thunder trees and uses a little acorn called a pointer to guide their way to them. We'll talk more about thunder trees shortly. In the first episode, we learn that the siblings missed the Great Migration. After meeting a friendly face named Mistletoad, they learn where the rest of the toads have gone: Toad Hollow. Toadlets who are unable to make it to Toad Hollow before the fairy ring closes by the end of the summer are turned into toadstools. Think of it like a permanent hibernation, or even death. Pretty dark, right? This cartoon, though aimed for a general younger audience, definitely had some darker themes going for it. I never realized it as a kid, but looking back, some of the things that are discussed and implied are actually pretty dark topics to discuss with kids. But they pull it off perfectly. It discusses these topics in a way that's easy for the younger viewers to understand. As the season progresses, the show talks about a wide variety of strangely adult topics. Like in the second episode, we meet a wandering minstrel named Earthstar, who has a huge crush on Beauty Stem, and they find out that he and his group actually missed the fairy ring. They had all been turned into toadlets, but somehow Earthstar turned back the following season. They touched upon it in a later episode as well, showing that Earthstar has a fear of returning to the place where the unfortunate event happened. All of his friends are still toadstools, and he pretty much has PTSD involving the event. Towards the end of the season, when the group finally finds the fairy ring, Panther Cap and Earthstar get separated from everyone. Panther Cap is trying to come to terms that he may not make it to Toad Hollow in time, and then he asks Earthstar,
Earthstar, what's it like being a toadstool?
Just like being asleep. You don't remember anything until you wake up.
Though they struggle a bit, the group actually does make it to Toad Hollow in the end, but when a crisis takes them back to the forest, Earthstar refuses to go, getting emotional in the process. This show cleverly tells its audience what this character is going through in an honestly pretty mature way. It makes me super happy because not a lot of kids shows do this anymore. Moving on from Earthstar, however, another big thing that the show touched on was racism, which is actually pretty surprising for a kids show. And it did this in quite a few episodes too. In one of the earlier episodes in Season 1, the Toadlet siblings meet an egotistical frog named Barnaby who claims that he's better at them in every way just because of what his species is. Though they end up teaching him a lesson, they have a bitter taste in their mouth about frogs. Later on, they meet a frog named Calypso, who's actually Barnaby's cousin. Furfoot takes a liking to her pretty quickly, but Puffball and Elfcup aren't impressed. They say she's the same as Barnaby, and the following conversation unfolds.
Puffball, why don't you like me?
Well,
'Cause you're a silly old frog.
like Barnaby.
Barnaby, he's my cousin.
And very silly, singing and dancing all the time. Hold it!
That's just Barnaby. He's always been like that. Because he's a frog.
Hold it! And we don't like Barnaby, so we don't like frogs. Hold it!
And when you meet a toad you don't like, are you gonna hate all toads, including your brother and sister?
Well, that's not the same thing.
Yes, it is. Calypso's right. Just because Barnaby was silly, it doesn't mean all frogs are silly.
Yeah, but...
No buts! We're the ones who are acting silly. We should be ashamed of ourselves.
It's a really good lesson to teach kids, and it's done so well too. Remember kids, racism isn't something you're born with, it's taught. And teaching kids things like this early on is so insanely important. A few other things that are touched on in the show can really only be described as having to deal with one's mortality and the potential of death, feeling like you're a burden, or having to watch someone you love die, or in this case, turn into a toadstool. Like in the episode called The Cure, Beauty Stem falls ill from ingesting gasoline in the water, and she can tell she's losing her strength. She tells Furfoot the following.
You're a good leader. You'll get them to the fairy ring. I know you will.
Don't be silly. Nothing's gonna happen to you. Faster! We have to go faster!
Or in Oyster's case, she feels like she's not important to the people around her, so doing something risky that could benefit the others seems like a good call in her eyes. Having to do something deadly that could cost her her life is an easy decision because she'll either A, do something that makes the others finally notice and appreciate her, or B, die trying, and it wouldn't matter because, in her eyes, she's not special enough. It's only when Panthercap decides to help her that she finally backs down, realizing that she does have a place with her family. On top of all this death talk, Earthstar literally sacrifices himself to the others. Though he doesn't technically die, quote-unquote, he transforms back into a toadstool. Beauty Stem doesn't take it well at all.
Don't worry, Earthstar. We'll change you back soon. I promise.
Oh, and just to throw it in there, Panthercap nearly dies right at the beginning of Season 2. There's always been close calls with the villain characters or unnamed villains, but Panthercap straight up drowns. Moving on from this depressing stuff, believe it or not, Toad Patrol actually had some interesting lore. It's a shame that it was never touched on. Throughout the course of the series, Mistletoad had been studying up on creatures called the Ancients, a group of old, wise toads that had disappeared from the Great Forest. He's dedicated his life to finding out about them and researching things that they had left behind. In one episode, we'll see him scaling cliffs and uncovering toad scratches, or cave paintings, left behind by the Ancients. Or in another episode, the gang is exploring one of the Ancients' temples. There's even an instance in an earlier Season 1 episode where Elfcup comes into contact with the Ancients and ends up being saved by them. Because there's only 2 seasons, we don't learn a lot about the Ancients or a lot of other information. All we can really learn beyond what's given to us is that everyone turning into toadstools is a curse, and that it can be lifted by playing a forest-wide symphony, causing them all to turn back to normal if played correctly. One can assume it's to keep toads safe during the winter, but there's so much that could have been explored had they made a few more episodes. And there's so much more we could have learned about the Ancients too, but they didn't, because the show ended in a perfect way. And, like, going back to the Ancients, aside from the Outsider, are there any more living Ancients in the world? Why did they appear to save Elf Cup? Why did they appear in the Ice Fortress to help Panther Cap save his siblings? As much as I want to know more, it seems that we're never going to get that chance. I'd even like to know more about what happens after the symphony is played and all the toads come back. I know it's all good and it's a happy ending, but what happens to everyone else? Earthstar returns again after changing back from a toadstool. Does he ever return to Toad Hollow, or does he stay in the forest? What does Mistletoe do now that his life's work has been answered? Does Beauty Stem go to learn with the Outsider, or does she go back to Toad Hollow with her family? What about more Erebus and Medea shenanigans? I want so much more! Unfortunately, it seems like George and Peggy Sarson aren't planning on doing much more with the cartoon, or the IP. We haven't heard news of a reboot or rights being given to someone else, so for now, it seems like Toad Patrol will remain lost media. Luckily, a lot of the episodes can be found on YouTube, though some are in different languages. If this video piqued your interest, definitely give it a watch. If you have kids, it might be a nice cartoon for them too, if they don't mind the, the crunchy quality, that is. Either way, Toad Patrol is like a fever dream. I thought for a long time that it was just something I imagined up until I saw the DVDs in Blockbuster one day. Oh yeah, by the way, the first half of the first season are on DVDs and they are available online if you prefer decent quality. When I found out that the show actually existed, I was beyond excited. I've only ever met a handful of people who actually knew about this cartoon, and most of them were Canadian, which, you know, kinda makes sense because it was originally a Canadian cartoon. Even if we get nothing else Toad Patrol related, I figure I'd spread the word on this hidden gem. Also, a big shout out to channels like Jordan Fringe and Ellis Mark for inspiring me to do something like this. This isn't my usual kind of video, and is more or less a one-off, but I sincerely hope you guys enjoyed, and consider subscribing if you're interested in Let's Plays and Speed Paints. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!